Are you one of the many people who think that the TV show Supernatural started its long and agonizing process of falling off somewhere after season 2, when the occasional genuinely interesting and well-made gimmick episodes started to bleed into the gritty and sarcastic tone of the show, and the power creep of the overarching plot made the main characters sort of obsolete because they were just two guys, so they had to keep pumping them up in increasingly unreasonable ways, which ultimately just resulted in all the other, allegedly more powerful characters feeling a whole lot weaker. And ultimately, the only way the showrunners could keep up interest was by doing copious amounts of fan service, at the end of the day turning the show into a parody of itself. Did you get excited when in later seasons they suddenly had a whole series of episodes where they refocused on their Monster of the Week format, and they were really good? They were very cool because the larger meta plot had sort of stalled and they needed episodes to fill. Do you then remember how two archangels had a fist fight in a church? Because I remember seeing that. I remember the exact time and place for me, actually. It was 4 a.m. I was with my girlfriend at the time in the airport of Palma de Mallorca because we were just done visiting my abuela. And we wanted to catch an early flight, so she dropped us off late in the evening and then we just hung out there. I laughed the whole fight. I was just laughing because it was too ridiculous. Like, I couldn't believe that this was the show Supernatural, and I stopped watching it after that. Anyway, Hunter the Reckoning is if Supernatural had remained good. Remember when Azazel was like scary as shit? Yeah, that's this game. And look, if you did enjoy Supernatural till the end, this game is a lot more like the early seasons, but if you want to get into the kind of shenanigans that they got into, World of Darkness is a very big and complex place. So you can go hog wild, I just recommend you don't. Just bear in mind that in this setting, humans are nowhere near on the same footing as anything supernatural. And regular humans is exactly what you are. Regular humans, I hear some of the Hunter veterans ask? And yes, in Hunter 5, which is not the 5th edition of Hunter, you do actually play as regular human beings as opposed to the Imbued. Which, anyone who doesn't know, that's basically humans plus. We are going to talk about the Imbued later. They've not been like stricken from the lore explicitly, they just have been moved out of the spotlight. But I think it's important to highlight this departure from the origins of the franchise. The 5th edition of World of Darkness, as also seen in like Vampire and Werewolf 5, really focuses on the small and gritty personal stories of low-level characters that are not too powerful within the larger context of the world. As a result of this, much of the old lore has even become sort of apocryphal, which is a bit controversial among many fans for understandable reasons. I hold the opinion that for your game, for your chronicle, you can put into place whatever lore you like. There was always a lot of it always contradicted itself, that was all on purpose. And actually, the 20th edition, which is the 4th edition of World of Darkness, did have a lot of books spread out across the various different types of games within World of Darkness, ironically, that gave you options and really focused on playing regular human beings who felt a strong conviction to fight monsters, as opposed to, like, you know, superhumans picked out by mystical entities. Hunter the Vigil from Chronicles of Darkness, which is different from World of Darkness, also had this premise. And I am 100% certain that when they had like the design planning meetings for this game, someone with authority walked into the room and was like, let me be clear. I want this game to be like the hit television show Supernatural. So that is the premise that Hunter 5 is built on, and I like it. Because especially in this game, you're basically entirely new to the supernatural world. And you're not even like a monster. You're just a person. Constantly finding out new, like, occult lore and not knowing whether or not any of it is actually true is a major aspect of the life of a young vampire. It's a huge challenge. And that is triply true for being a hunter. And the thing is too, the mechanics that are in the book of the 5th edition, they allow you not only to play with the powers of an Imbued, especially if you're willing to go back into older editions and like import some stuff, upgrade it, homebrew it, if you could even call it that. There is a temptation for every hunter to take every edge that they can get to go after the supernatural. So being an Imbued is, as a player, not your only option, and I find a lot of the other ones are very much more interesting, but we're going to talk about all that later. We have to cover the basics first. So let me be the first to say, if you would like to run a game of Hunter the Reckoning, and you feel that in order to do that, because it intersects with pretty much all of the other World of Darkness games, you need to know pretty much all of the World of Darkness lore, don't think that. Do not think it. Stop thinking that. I encourage you to find out more. Of course, I have whole video primers that'll help you out with that. But if you were going to make up monsters from whole cloth, or even just modify the way that certain monsters would work within the lore in ways that maybe contradict the established lore, this would be the game where you do that. You can do it here. It's no problem. The actual official Hunter 5 book is full of monsters that very explicitly shirk the rules of regular examples of whatever supernatural being that they are supposed to be. And I, as a bit of a lore expert, can of course speculate about that, but really that's just because there's so much material to speculate with. Every aspect of the World of Darkness is full of like exceptions and flukes and weird shit that you wouldn't expect. There's fairies on the moon and vampires that can travel through time. Your idea of a weird jumping golem that can phase through walls has some sort of place in that.
And so is the reverse shapeshifter who has other people shapeshift into his appearance instead of the other way around.
But neither you nor your players need to know what exactly that is. They just need to figure out enough to know how to kill it. Really, the figuring out aspect is supposed to take up the majority of your game time. It's a game that really heavily leans on the mystery aspect of it all. Although, of course, like any World of Darkness game, it also very heavily features social dynamics. It's just that combat specifically only takes up a very small, very intense, very high-stakes portion of it all. Because obviously, of course, no matter how badass your characters are, you're not going to engage in a prolonged war of attrition with a monster. That's just not going to happen. It'll destroy you. You need to find out as much about your quarry as possible, both in terms of the lore that surrounds it and how it fits into mortal society, devise a trap, and spring it. Your momentum comes from the element of surprise. You take down a quarry by striking hard when it's on its back foot. And a lot of unexpected things can and will go wrong along the way. So figuring out how this particular monster works, how we as a cell are interacting with it, is a key aspect of the fun. Especially if the way that the monster works ends up surprising me. But not in the sense that all the research you did, actually it works completely different and it's useless and you're all dead. That's not what I mean. I mean when the way that it does end up working that we find out about is unexpected and innovative. Even if you are going to be running a very lore-accurate Hunter the Reckoning Chronicle and you're worried that their knowledge of the World of Darkness is going to ruin your veteran players' fun, or that they will use that knowledge to like metagame themselves out of their own fun, first of all, play only with people who play their characters in good faith, but also I would be able to identify a Niktuku as like a player if a good GM described it to me. And the fact that I would know that whatever level of danger my character in Hunter thinks they are in way more danger than that. It would excite me as a player. I would love that. And that's why I like the new approach of World of Darkness 5. So sure, you're not gonna fly guns blazing into the first city of Enoch aboard Vietnam-era assault helicopters, but you are going to forge meaningful connections with other regular people that have been thrust to live this horrible life in the shadows. You won't just care about a quest, you will care about a community of people. And of course, even though hunters are just regular people, they are anything but ordinary. Every hunter has had some sort of encounter with the supernatural. Sometimes it's a single, powerful, traumatic experience. Other times it's a long and dramatic unfurling of events. And instead of faltering when they realized that what they were up against was something far beyond their wildest imagination, they stood firm and faced the darkness. Hunters are driven people who have become obsessed with the supernatural and would sacrifice almost anything to protect other people from it. Or rather, how much they're willing to sacrifice really depends on the individual hunter. It's one of the main conflicts that most of the characters in this game are going to live through, but given that they are who they are and that they have chosen to lead the life that they lead, it's probably gonna lean more toward everything. Hunters come in 5 distinct flavors, known as creeds. These describe both their basic, practical approach to the hunt, but also double as sort of philosophical or ideological outlooks. Hunters identify themselves and each other by their creeds, and hunters of the same creed will often prefer hanging out together because of shared outlooks. At the end of the day, though, they are all hunters first, and they recognize that for a lot of jobs, if you want to get them done, you need a certain diversity of thought. Do bear in mind that within each creed, though certain archetypes of skill sets and character traits are more common, you're gonna find all manner of people from all walks of life with all types of abilities. Their creed informs their motivations, but it's not a character class. Mechanically, it's less like a clan from Vampire and more like an affiliation from Mage. And as with both, you get to play against type and are in fact encouraged to. Underground hunters are those who occupy the liminal spaces of society where the rules don't even apply all that much anyway. The scenes and milieus that are not really part of respectable society. In other words, they are poor and marginalized people, and from among those ranks, often, quite frankly, criminals. Look, you might be a bully boy for the local racketeering biker club, but you know that there's some shit out there in the night. And whatever semblance of morals you do have does include actually doing a little something for your protection money, which is protecting the people you collected from shit that the regular law enforcement is certainly not going to. Monsters lurking in the shadows. And this is really just because from among the poor and the marginalized, criminals are the ones who are most likely to encounter the supernatural and feel as though they can do something about it. But you could also be a militant political radical who defends immigrant communities. You could even be a disgruntled cop who moonlights as a vigilante. The Underground Creed says that the system is not enough, and the rules imposed by society are hindrances to the hunt and must be ignored. There is no shame in stooping to the level of the monsters. This is a case of self-defense, asymmetrical warfare against powers way beyond our comprehension. You have to utilize every tool at your disposal, manage your resources wisely, and strike whenever you can get away with it. And if you need to work with thugs and cartels to do it, you do it. Those are useful people in the war against monsters. I would always rather have a bunch of gangbangers pumping caps with Tech 9s into a werewolf than not have that. Subterfuge and guerrilla tactics are the Underground Creed's greatest weapon. They're not gonna pick any fights that they can't win, that is pointless. But they are gonna take every opportunity to weaken the monster, even if it's just financially, hurting its resources, wrecking its shit. If nothing else, it sends a powerful message. Do not fuck with us. When those arrogant monsters then invariably do continue to fuck with us, they will make a mistake, and we can exploit that mistake. Underground Creed hunters tend to be callous and pragmatic, creative and paranoid. Their moral codes are certain to bring friction into any cell they're a part of. And often, let's be serious, that is because the only reason they're not called monsters is because the things they are hunting are far worse than they are. Martial hunters are soldiers in the war against the predations of the supernatural. Their worldview is simple, clear-cut, good and bad, and if you're not on the side of fighting the monsters, you might as well be on theirs. They're not just content with hitting monsters wherever they can, they want results, conclusions, an end to their quarry. As such, they will sometimes pick fights that they do not have a great chance of winning, if there is a good chance that it will eliminate the quarry. And look, anyone who's played Vampire will be able to tell you that for most of the clans that you can pick, being a fledgling vampire who gets into a fist fight with a mortal human who just so happens to be Green Beret, it's not gonna be a fun time. You might not end up killing you, but he will give you a whooping you will not so soon forget. But as a hunter, picking a fight in a low intel tactical environment, you cannot be sure, and in fact you can almost be sure of the inverse, that the fight you're entering is going to be even remotely evenly matched. Luckily for the martial creed, they do tend to be the best at fighting, whether it be down in the ditches, running logistics, or implementing plans. Most have military or law enforcement backgrounds, some come from the other hunter organizations that they got disillusioned with because they were too focused on enforcing some sort of political agenda instead of hunting monsters. But that is far from exclusive. A physically meek cybersecurity expert might massively expand the martial tactical portfolio, as might a charismatic marketer who can mobilize allies and resources. Part of knowing how to fight and win is knowing how to stack the odds in your favor. Even though, of course, no plan survives contact with the enemy, you do want to design a hit where you can go in, go out, clean up. And yes, for that you need as many guns as you can get, but also as much knowledge as you can get. Contrary to stereotype, marshals are very much willing to put in the time to do their research. Wars are, after all, won with intelligence as much as they are won with manpower. What they do tend to have a problem with is moral ambiguity. They do not like collaborating with supernatural beings, even if it might give them an advantage. Because, I mean, after all, who knows more about vampires than a vampire, right? But the only reason that vampire is telling you any of that is because they have an agenda, and if you follow their advice, you are making them stronger somehow. And, you know, in fairness, most hunters would think thrice about entering an alliance like that. But the thing about the supernatural is that it is not always clear-cut. Ghouls serve vampires, but not always because they really necessarily want to, and most of them, maybe not most of them, but many of them certainly can be redeemed, and maybe they're trying to get to that somehow. Many of the magical arts are rather helpful, but also connected to dark powers. There's witches out in the bayou and wide-eyed doctors with strange machinery in the city that can suture wounds in a matter of minutes, and heal them too. Certainly good after a hunt, but what kind of curses does that witch cast? And what kind of crazy experiments does that scientist get up to when he's not busy suturing you? Marshals tend to be distrustful of people like that, and quite frankly, usually rightly so. Right up until the point where that is no longer the case, and they just killed a witch that spent most of her days protecting people from evil spirits. Or a mad scientist who was trying to cure children of cancer that regular medicine had given up on. Inquisitive hunters are possessed with a morbid curiosity about the hidden world of supernatural and occult secrets that they found out is there, and they need to know as much about it as possible. And boy, is there a lot to know. Let's not mince words, the hunter society would collapse if it wasn't for Inquisitive Creed hunters. Few jobs have libraries of terms as vast and as mired in false information. And in no job are the stakes higher, so you better not get it wrong. You know how hard it is to obtain information as a supernatural creature. It becomes immeasurably more difficult if you're a human stumbling around in the dark. So there is nothing more useful than having someone along for the ride who does have a grasp of what is what and can separate the facts from the deadly bullshit. Problem is that while yes, certainly the main reason that these people are hunters is to hunt, and the reason they collect collect all this knowledge is first and foremost to keep people safe. That doesn't mean those are the only reasons. Let's face it, there's not many rewards to being a hunter. It's a path you work on because of a conviction that is so strong, it's almost compelling. But that doesn't mean you don't want nice things when they're right in front of you. And the deeper you dig into the supernatural, the more you find out that there's actually a lot of power in it. Power you'd never even have thought possible. And I mean, let's face it, as a hunter, you probably weren't looking for the white picket fence anyway. Not to mention, a lot of this power would legitimately help you on the hunt. Temptation is a constant companion to this creed of hunters above all others, and though they are invaluable to any cell they are a part of, they are also the most likely to compromise an operation if it means significantly expanding their knowledge. And for the best reasons, really. Objectively, in the grand scheme of things, letting this monster get away is gonna give us so much information that we can use to actually save people in the long run. That's literal lives saved if we let this happen. And isn't saving people the part of the sentence that comes first? Most commonly, inquisitive hunters spring from the halls of academia, where maybe they found some sort of occult text at the university library, decided to look into it on a whim, and discovered much more than they bargained for. But any hunter that believes that knowledge is the strongest weapon against the encroaching darkness can be a part of this creed. Like a private investigator trying to find a larger pattern, or even a social butterfly who likes to understand people on a deep and meaningful level. There's a few hunters who view inquisitives with a degree of suspicion, usually entirely unfounded. They are as committed to the hunt as anyone. They just see the hunt as more than just this quarry and the next. And quite frankly, for all the expertise they have gathered, hunters are still the only people who will listen to what they have to say. Faithful hunters know that the various creatures described in the scriptures of their religion are more than just allegory. And among those who believe, they know that they are the ones who must go toe-to-toe with them. Some of them see this as an exalted confirmation of their beliefs. They are happy to take up the mantle of paladin against the forces of evil. Others would have preferred to remain in the dark and not be aware of the fiends like the rest of the flock. It's messed up how confirmation of the things you previously had to take on faith can be a heavier burden than the doubts you had to carry before. Especially if the doubts are not entirely eliminated. No one religion or worldview has a monopoly on producing faithful hunters. There's faithful hunters of all belief systems, and many of them do actually have abilities that rival those of the monsters, that are genuinely supernatural. The power of true faith has existed in pretty much every version of the World of Darkness, and though it is not explicitly available as a mechanic within the rules, it is possible to make it within the framework that you are given. You can sense monsters, repel monsters, harm monsters with the "it's definitely not magic" of faith. And true faith isn't just limited to one belief system either. A voodoo ritual can banish demons just as effectively as a Catholic exorcism. As a result, you have creative hunters who are often, but not always, quite extreme in their various contradictory religious beliefs, finding common ground in the quest of protecting the same people from the same things. Needless to say, conversations can sometimes get heated among the faithful. And other hunters are often annoyed as shit at their constant proselytizing, if indeed that is what they do. You don't have, if you want to play this type of character, you don't have to be preaching all the time. Sometimes they are outright suspicious that these people would manifest abilities comparable to the kind of stuff that those deeply religious reality benders with the particularly pernicious cults that they build around themselves can make happen also. This isn't to say that all faithful have access to their own set of supernatural abilities, or that this type of thing doesn't occur with other creeds. It's just that they are more likely to have access to those kinds of artifacts secret knowledge, or spiritual fortitude. The faithful steadfastness in the face of supernatural darkness is a huge boon to any cell, regardless of whether it also comes with some sort of superhuman trappings. They often have access to various kinds of fringe communities with very useful and very unique perspectives on various monsters. They are, on the other hand, often also quite eccentric and have to follow all manner of sometimes problematic rules. Maybe they need to offer some sort of redemption to the creatures that they're calling their quarry, and only if they spurn that redemption can they be destroyed. Maybe they will dismiss certain entirely valid sources of intel because it comes from a practitioner of a religion that they consider evil. But at the end of the day, clearly, whatever it is they believe in seems to be on their side more often than not. Entrepreneurial hunters are not satisfied with simple solutions when it comes to the hunt. They see opportunity everywhere, and they will take any chance they can get to obtain an advantage over the monsters. In their minds, the way hunting is done, the very hunter society itself is sleeping on a lot of ways in which the hunt could be made safer, easier, and more effective. As such, the entrepreneurial creed includes a lot of inventors and creatives coming up with all sort of gadgets and knickknacks. Problem is, useful as though it might certainly be once it is fully developed, usually you have to field test it. It's difficult to create like a proper lab environment to really get the full numbers on the Incineratinator 2000. And on the hunt, doing that, setting up those parameters, might give the quarry an opportunity to escape. Or even worse, turn the tide. But think of the rewards if we could develop this machine and distribute it among hunters. Hunters of this creed can often seem like their main goal is not so much the pursuit of the hunt as the pursuit of their business mindset. And it can be difficult to see that this grind set really exists primarily in pursuit of the hunt. Especially because a lot of entrepreneurials specialize in being fixers, managing the logistics of their cells, manipulating quarries with economic warfare. But when the chips are down, they are often not the ones whose ass is on the line to test this new technology or approach they're trying to implement. And when it doesn't work, they're also often not the ones who have to pay the price either. From an out-of-game perspective, a lot of people actually take issue with this creed, and it does certainly feel like the most taped together of them all. Mad scientists and business people usually don't really have all that much in common. They could, if they wanted to, have separated these out into two different creeds, and God knows why they didn't do that. But design-wise, it is important to remember that creeds are not the same as character classes. And bringing an unusual approach to the hunt is something that these two concepts do have in common. As well as a potential desire and overlap to, like, make money off of dealing with the supernatural. Which is not a terrible idea because hunters do have certain employment problems. They don't just keep weird hours and strange schedules of traveling long distances on a whim. They also, like, a lot of the shit they do is just illegal and they could land in jail or prison at any time. The Winchesters used to live off credit card fraud. Like, people forget that this was the case. They had one episode where they highlighted this, and just nothing. So having someone who can take care of that side of things in a legal way is really going to do a lot to keep the team operational. And if someone goes out of their way to hire a monster hunting corporation, it makes doing the job a whole lot less thankless. It might have to show up as a consultancy firm with an ambiguous name in the government records when the city manager hires the cell to root out some Wendigo problem, but it's money. You know what I mean? That's what the creed seems to be about mostly ideologically. But when you look at the mechanics, it seems to be primarily about coming up with technology and gadgets and stuff. The usefulness of which should also be, like, obvious. It's a common trope to have, like, someone who tinkers on the team. But it is something they could have added to the Inquisitive creeds, or maybe one of the others. Which ultimately would have left a creed of people who go, look, I'm not particularly athletic, good at shooting or researching the occult, but I am good at making money, and so I'm gonna do that and then give you that money and then keep the hunters able to save lives, which is immensely useful, of course, but also kind of boring to play for a lot of people, so it really doesn't make much sense to dedicate an entire creed to it. So from an in-universe perspective, we just have to sort of accept that Hunter society just evolved this way. And given the overlap that does exist, and, you know, if we choose to see it from the right angle, we can kinda see it though, right? World of Darkness games tend to be less about plot and more about the social landscape that the characters inhabit. The culture and relationships, the conflict and intrigue, the path to fulfillment in the context of one's society are central themes. Hunter is different in that it is still very much about those things, but it is a little more plot-focused. It has a pretty clearly delineated mission format, which is not something that other World of Darkness games usually have, but of course, all of that happens within the context of Hunter Society, which, crucially, isn't as formalized as the various societies we know from the supernatural kinds of games. Hunters organize themselves into cells, groups of people that work together to take down a quarry and then move on to the next. Cells can and do look very different from each other. They include people with all manner of creeds, and they see themselves as having all manner of particular purposes and jobs in what they do. It could be two brothers riding across the US of A in a muscle car and occasionally aided in their exploits by their not really but kind of actually uncle. And in the best of days, other people they know from a roadside inn. It could be a programmer, an athlete on the regional swimming team, a pizza delivery driver, and a subway mechanic, all teaming up to hunt monsters in the greater Paris metro area. It could be an unusual family centered around a surprisingly athletic and deeply insane grandpa who zip around Norfolk, UK in a decommissioned school bus. It could be a group of political extremists in the Philippines who realize that actually the corrupt politicians aren't even the greatest problem. It's the monsters they're in bed with that are sucking this country dry. Probably like a third of the whole Hunter 5 book is about stuff that's happening in the Philippines, which I don't know why, but I'm here for it. It's cool. Working together is essential if you want to fight monsters. And hunters know other hunters outside of their cells, especially if they cover the same geographical area and are of the same creed. If you run in the same circles, eventually you're gonna be able to recognize people in the lifestyle. That's just how it works. However, all of these are loose social networks, never really codified institutional organizations. At least not where the real hunters do their work. Because there's plenty of more organized hunter groups called orgs, they're just not really in it for the hunt. Real hunters call them jobbers. They're usually well-trained, well-equipped, backed by big resources. The problem is that while hunting monsters is certainly part of their agenda, it's never the main part of their agenda. And that means that they are bad. Okay, so I think we need to take a step back here, and I'm gonna do my thing where I do like very poor vampire analogies that don't really translate all that well, but I like keep going with them until they really just fall apart. But I still pretend like they make sense, and they kinda do. So in Vampire, kinda the default thing that we're a part of as player characters is the Camarilla, the main sort of government body of the vampiric society, and it has an enemy group, which is the Sabbat, right? In Mage, kind of, we're part of the traditions, which is sort of the Sabbat to the greater, actual, real government of mages of the Technocracy. Bear in mind that these organizations are in no way comparable. It's just that from the narrative point of view, we are the underdog major organization that defines itself in opposition to the governmentally defined one. In Hunter, the player characters are, to put it in vampire terms, anarchs. Independent operators that don't really want anything to do with either of the major sects and just want to carve their own path in life. And though they do tend to know each other and be able to even rely on each other's support in times of crisis, they have no interest in creating some sort of codified formal society. And much like the anarchs, they tend to be extremely hypocritical and self-righteous about all that shit. There are 5 types of hunter orgs, and this is no no accident, because they are indeed dark mirrors to the 5 hunter creeds. Dark mirror in this case really meaning that there's barely any difference between them at all, and the main clear delineation is the ephemeral game term quality of drive. That is the thing that distinguishes regular jobber hunters from capital H hunters. The gamebook is actually written in a way where it's really just extremely self-righteous about this shit, where things that the orgs do, if the player characters would do them, they're fine because they're doing them for the right reasons. Which is like a very clever way of writing it, because it like illustrates the irony of some of the self-righteous modes of thinking that you have to engage in order to really be part of that anarch culture. The mental gymnastics they do to separate themselves from people that they're 99% identical with. I mean, at least I hope it's written that way in order to illustrate this sort of irony. Maybe I'm just giving the media literacy too much credit. Within Hunter Society, effective though they may be, Hunter orgs are institutions. And institutions inherently cannot be about the hunt and the hunt alone. They always represent the interests of whoever is funding them, and as such cannot be trusted to do the right thing. Which isn't to say that hunters won't work with them sometimes, or that hunters always do the right thing. And the game really is about diving into the moral friction that happens here. A good Hunter Chronicle will confront you with a lot of ethical conundrums, and one of the main ones is, will we work with this organization and enjoy the benefits of doing so? And do we risk the stabbing in the back that may well follow? An orc can give you money, intel, legal protection even, but ultimately there's always a reason why they're coming to you, an independent cell of hunters with whatever it is that they're coming to you with. And that reason may well be, they're a little short-staffed, they know about this monster that's like somewhat outside their wheelhouse, and so they're passing the intel along because they really want the danger to be banished. But it may also be that they don't know what they're dealing with, and they would like to find out. Or, maybe even worse, they know exactly what they're dealing with, and they want a bunch of independents to, like, take the damage, the casualties, and probably even the fall when the hunt inevitably goes wrong. Then they can swoop in, take down a weakened quarry, and take all the credit for doing so. All the while you bore the brunt of the attack, if you are still alive at all. It's dangerous to work with orgs, but unfortunately it's often also worth it, or simply necessary. And you never really quite know what the case is. I'm going to show you one example org of each of the 5 types that exist out there. How they work, what they do, all that. But bear in mind that these are 5 categories, and the orgs that operate within whatever area that you're running the game in may be very different ones, and there's always going to be more than just 5 of them, obviously. So I really encourage you to come up with your own ideas for this. They don't need to be completely fleshed out at the beginning of the game. Just look into what's there, what you could come up with, and come up with it. The Arcanum is a semi-secret society of wealthy gentlemen scholars seeking to understand the various facets and truths and aspects of the supernatural world. As an academic-type org, the dark mirror of the Inquisitive creed, this pursuit of knowledge is their primary goal. Although they do support hunters and have a few people who engage in the hunt themselves, they would pretty much always let the quarry escape if it meant they would be learning something new and useful. This is actually one of the major points of contention within the organization, because they were originally founded as a sort of like one of those political lodges in Victorian London seeking to acquire mystical power. But eventually they figured out that there's a lot of dangerous shit out there, and they were like, should we be like doing something about all this? Because we know things, we could help with this. Article 4 of the Arcanum syllabus explicitly forbids this line of thinking, because the organization does not pass judgment upon the supernatural. It's not within their bailiwick to moralize. They simply observe. That is only the law de jour, though, because even senior leadership is engaged in all kinds of efforts to protect humanity from monsters. Not all of which are particularly happy that the Arcanum is trying to learn all their secrets. Vampires in particular have grown increasingly aware of their presence and have, over the years, destroyed quite a bit of their infrastructure, a lot of valuable books and artifacts. Killed some staff too, but they're just staff, so who gives a shit? So the Arcanum is pretty strict on exercising Article 4 when it comes to the kindred, but everyone else is kind of fair game. Except when still they secretly meddle with vampire shit, because how could they resist? The main field of expertise is mages and magic, and many members of the Arcanum are actually quite skilled at practicing the arts of sorcery. Unbeknownst to them, mainly the Hermetics, but also to a lesser extent the Choristers and Etherites, use the Arcanum in an effort to shape consensus to be more conducive to their particular kinds of magic. Because the Arcanum ultimately is funded by like very fucking old money coming from very fucking old families who were like the primary beneficiaries of colonialism, and are thus embedded in academic institutions all over the world, with many of their members actually publishing in legitimate and respectable journals. As a hunter, having someone from the Arcanum in your Rolodex is invaluable. They have chapter houses all over the world with vast libraries of supernatural secrets. And though officially they're not supposed to share it because that was sort of the power base of the organization in Victorian London, there's been a strong push to make all of that knowledge more accessible to the public, and as a hunter, you get special access anyway. But do be aware that you will be owing a favor to someone who is very rich and very powerful and very curious. And whatever dark lore you bring back home to them, you have no idea who they'll pass it on to. The Mortician's army is a highly militant group working to free Minnesota of the vampire menace and all those who would collaborate with the vampire menace. As a vigilante org, the dark mirror to the underground creed, they are utterly ruthless in their pursuit of their goals and will stop at nothing, including making vampire collaborators disappear at the slightest notion of suspicion. And if your luck is poor, just being out after dark, looking kinda goth with your neck exposed, is collaborator behavior. So they didn't put a vigilante org into the Hunter 5 rulebook, even though it's listed as an org type that orgs can be from. So I had to lift this one off World of Darkness fiction. You could say that Revenge is a vigilante org, that's in the book, but it is listed as a corporate org in the book, and also I kind of choose to ignore its existence because somebody really should have told the writers that personal data isn't that valuable. The cost of having someone drive out to a grieving family to make them all install an app on their phone is gonna be bigger than whatever amount of data you manage to scrub off those phones in like a whole lifetime. And especially because they're a family and the data is very clustered up, that's kind of diminishing returns at some point. No one's trying to fucking spy on the family of Bob and Jane Peterson living in the Midwest. It's just that you're not gonna make any money off of having their data. In any case, the Mortician's army, which is what we're actually talking about, they banded together originally as actually different cells of hunters in that area who really wanted to pool resources to deal with the vampire menace after some particularly horrific incidents had occurred. But because vampires live in secrecy, ultimately what happened is that most of the energy of that militia, most of the momentum, the motivation that they had, and the resources that they had pulled was sort of, shall we say, wasted on running impromptu trials for like vampire thralls. They would like threaten people to hand over resources that they needed or be branded a collaborator. Imagine you own a gun shop and like a bunch of preppers come in with a weird logo on their fucking, right, it's a militia, and they like, give us all the ammunition you have so we can hunt vampires. And if you don't do that, we will turn your house into Swiss cheese because we know where you live. Which is what happens with vigilante groups. Their fervor ultimately mainly manifests in like imposing social control on their community. Now granted, the Mortician's army was able to deal a massive blow to the local Camarilla once they had a foot in the door. But not before their leader like sacrificed his own daughter and like got killed by her in turn. And not before a bunch of completely innocent people got killed in a conflict that they really had nothing to do with. They had no awareness of the supernatural. And it's easy for hunters to get dragged into this kind of thing. In a way, all they do is vigilantism, it's just that that's not really a field where there's a lot of laws governing it. And the idea of actually getting something done can be very appealing. The Orpheus Group is a high-tech boutique contractor that has mastered the technology of being able to put people under in a way that allows them to become ghosts and manifest in the Shadowlands. And then also being, getting them back from, having died, essentially. That's pretty crucial. As a corporate org, the Dark Mirror of the Entrepreneurial Creed, they have found a niche in the world of the supernatural that they can exploit for monetary gain, and they're doing it. Which is a hell of a lot better than most corporate orgs, which are often just protection rackets, and which often do pose a particular danger to hunters because, well, hunters are doing something for free that these corporations could be doing for a profit. People have been killed for less. Orpheus originally started as a cryogenics company, but after a series of long, very unethical experiments, they became capable of dealing with hauntings. Usually they will do this for rich clients, they will drive out to wherever they're needed, they will set up the death pods that they have, which are electronic sarcophagi, basically, full of medical equipment, and then they will send their operatives as ghostly apparitions across the gauntlet into the upper layers of the underworld. Sometimes, if they feel like they can get a lot of valuable information out of a job, they will do the work pro bono. But given that Orpheus is actually quite a small operation, they don't do that very often. Unofficially, they also take up contracts for espionage, which is corporate only at this point, because it seems as though, and this is not entirely clear, that the NSA also has access to certain aspects of their technology as well. And in a strike of great risk and technological sophistication, they also assassinate people, but they don't do it very often, so it's fine, I guess. And yes, this is the Orpheus from the World of Darkness game line Orpheus, which is like the successor to the Wraith the Oblivion thing, which is not even really a successor, it's a spin-off that delves into the ruins of what happened in Wraith after the Avatar Storm. Officially, at least, I have a whole video on Wraith the Oblivion, the ghosts, the underworld, their society. You can check that out. And unlike in the official Orpheus continuity, in the H5 continuity, the Orpheus Group exists. It wasn't destroyed, annihilated, blown up, like it was at the end of the Orpheus game line. The big problem is, of course, that they are mostly after money. And as with the one time where they let a dozen or so death row inmates die in their pods because they were just sort of fucking around. They didn't know exactly what they were doing even. Turning those guys into vengeful spirits that ended up haunting the company. Or, the literal hit jobs that they do. They're gonna do some pretty unethical shit in pursuit of profit. And that's exactly what hunters need to be mindful of. Not only are they at the end of the day expendable assets, the expending of which would be much better to the bottom line, it's also to them very appealing to be able to make money off hunting monsters. Certainly easier than having a day job that distracts you from hunting or living in fucking squalor. And when you find out that what you do can actually be quite lucrative, you might encounter a certain misalignment of your priorities. And if you want to prevent a misalignment of my priorities, you should consider becoming one of the many people who already have chosen to support me with small amounts of, or sometimes large amounts of money, let's be fair, on Patreon. This new way of making videos that I think I've been on for a year now is a lot more labor intensive than what I used to do, even though it comes out to fewer videos. The overall runtime is longer. So if you want to help me keep doing what I'm doing, patreon.com/Burgerkrieg, there is a link down in the description. Let's start the show. The Society of Leopold is the Vatican's elite strike force against all things vampire, and also various other kinds of supernatural beings. They have a broad portfolio, but they're very laser focused on vampires. As a religious orc, the Dark Mirror of the Faithful Creed, they are not just equipped with supernatural knowledge and artifacts of holiness, but also the certainty of the ontological rightness of their actions, as all those who are put in their path are put in their path because they are agents of the Antichrist. The Society of Leopold is ancient, and if you're a vampire player, you may have heard of it. The original foundation, or rather the groundwork that was laid into what would eventually become their formal foundation as an institution within the Vatican in the Middle Ages, was ironically laid by the elder vampire Fabrizio Ulfila, who was one of the few Ventru who managed to attain and maintain a position of great influence and power within the Catholic Church. And he was like, what if there was mobs of armed militants that fight my enemies? That is exactly what happened. And also more than that. But that was one of the things that happened to a certain extent. But also more things than they did more. It was more than just the enemies. Ulfila is still around, by the way. He's like almost 2,000 years old now. He's a Methuselah in anything but like generation. Except he's just, he used to be basically the prince of all of Lombardy. The prince of Milan, I should say. Nothing in Lombardy would happen without his knowledge. Now he's just some guy at the Giovanni court in Venice. Although one of the key figures within the Society of Leopold in the Hunter 5 sourcebook has the surname Ulfila, so who knows if that's an Easter egg or maybe a sign of greater things to come. The Leopoldites have access to all kinds of faith-based magic and techno-magical gadgets, not to mention the fact that they maintain a tight cadre of highly trained hunters equipped with bespoke body armor made specifically to protect them from the kinds of shit that monsters will do to them. Because most of the body armor you can buy at the body armor store is made for like warfare kind of environments, which of course the enemy soldiers in Afghanistan are not going to bite your neck. Then that's not real. They have guns. They operate all over the globe, and thanks to the vast information networks of the Catholic Church, they are at home pretty much anywhere. They coordinate vampire tracking and killing efforts worldwide, providing training and intelligence to various agencies, but never so much that they themselves can be displaced. Because of course, being the religious org that they are, their main purpose is to kill monsters in line with the doctrines of Catholicism, and to advance the interests of Catholicism, to bring monster hunting glory to the church, and only the church, no matter who else was involved. Which is why when the Society of Leopold gets in touch with you, or really any other like Catholic society, they probably are a front for the Leopoldites at that point. They probably have a reason why they don't want to send their highly trained and devoted elite strike force that have like access to grenades that create a gas that has similar effects on vampires as sunlight, because they have that. They think that all of that is going to be less useful to be thrown at the fight against whatever they're throwing you at than, like, you. A team of ragtag independent hunters. Do you feel what I'm getting at here? The FBI Special Affairs Division is a department within the US government's domestic intelligence and law enforcement apparatus that deals with cases that cannot be easily explained through the means of criminology. As a government org, the Dark Mirror of the Martial Creed, they get to operate with impunity under the law, and can execute ops the way that they think is appropriate, without having to deal with all of the legal ramifications that hunters have to worry about. These are the classic G-men, the mirror shades guys in suits, and as you might suspect if you know a little bit about World of Darkness lore in general, yes, the New World Order had a hand in creating them, but mainly as a catalyst to the meme of the Mirror Shades agent, so that would become part of consensus and they would be better able to work their magic. And also as an excellent recruiting ground, though they have access to the entirety of the US surveillance apparatus and the hyper-militarized police force, they actually strike relatively rarely. For an organization with their level of funding, I mean, the absolute numbers are still high. SAD agents are attached to various weird-looking cases in various government departments all across the United States. So they see a lot and often have vast networks of informants to like pass intel from and receive intel to. It's the other way around than what I said. They are engaged in a constant information war, an info war, if you will, with and this is really quite embarrassing. With other parts of the US government that also investigate supernatural things. Like the military's Information Awareness Office, the new kid on the block with Pentagon-level funding. There's a lot of jurisdiction friction, and that really is where most of their labor goes into. Just jockeying for power within, like, the government and trying to get access to Black Ops slush fund money. And you know, sometimes the easiest way to get that is to take out someone who's a political opponent of someone who controls that kind of cash. You know, flesh and blood, not even a monster, just a guy. Which is really the problem. A lot of monsters get away because of red tape or because interagency shenanigans interfere with the operation. In many such situations, the SAD will contact teams of freelance hunters and deploy them in a way that allows them to still claim the credit. But think about this, right? Why would the US government pay a bunch of insurgents in possession of illegal firearms to perform an extrajudicial killing of someone who presumably pays taxes? Yeah, vampires pay taxes. Like, they're smarter than Al Capone. What could you possibly do that the US government can't? Sure, they're handing out get-out-of-jail-free cards like they're made of paper, but given that they're trying to maintain a low profile as a department, how sure are you that those are worth the paper they're printed on? And if you are ever in a situation where they can feel like they can do their thing, and they look at you as though you are meddling because you're just doing your job as a hunter, do you really want one of those people to point at you and say, I know that guy. I know their first name, their last name, their middle names. I know their date of birth, their private home address, their social security number. I worked with that guy before. Now I can hear a lot of you asking, but hang on, Burger, what about the Second Inquisition? Actually, probably not that many of you are saying that. You're just assuming that the Society of Leopold is the Second Inquisition. But aha! That is incorrect. I mean, it's not entirely wrong either, to be fair. It's just that there's a bigger picture here, and that bigger picture is there is no such thing as the Second Inquisition. That's right, the Second Inquisition isn't really a term that anyone involved with the Second Inquisition really identifies with. They may never even have heard that being said, because it's a term made up by vampires to describe what they feel like is an organization or group of organizations of mortals that form a unified faction to try to eradicate them. They lived through the First Inquisition, but much like the First Inquisition was also, it's not so much one organization and more of a movement, a phenomenon. And sometimes a federation, because many of the various organizations involved in the effort to exterminate vampires do collaborate, does not often go super easy. All of the aforementioned orgs are part of the Second Inquisition. Well, maybe not Orpheus, because their métier is ghosts. But all the other ones, they have some level of involvement with what they call the Second Inquisition. Even you, freelance hunter going after vampires right now, are probably going to be labeled member of the Second Inquisition by those vampires. The bulk of the army is actually like the special forces and intelligence services of the various countries, all those three-letter glowy organizations, often relying on support and coordination from the Society of Leopold. And they all have very different approaches and philosophies. The Boas Caveiras commandos in Brazil are extremely fucking brutal in squeezing their civilian populations, and the absolute global elite when it comes to urban warfare. The British SO-13 is extremely bellicose and will always go in with overwhelming force to destroy as many vampires as possible, and they are pretty much always happy to sacrifice any kind of valuable intel to exterminate with extreme prejudice. The 8th direction of Russia's GRU intelligence service is they rely on like magic, Christian Orthodox sorcery, and they also keep a bunch of high generation vampires on tap in like secret dark government facilities in order to turn their best operatives into thin bloods. So in a way, thin bloods are bringing about the extermination of vampire kind. And that really is one of the main conflicts of any good hunter chronicle. Because hunters exist in that liminal space where they are regular humans with a lot of knowledge about the supernatural. And many of them will seek to attain more of that power themselves in order to become more effective as hunters. At least this is what they will tell themselves. And the supernatural isn't just plain evil. there's a lot of very good stuff in there. The line is very different for every individual hunter, and this might create major conflict and rifts within your group. So yeah, we've reached that part of the video, and the first and main thing I'm going to talk about is, ironically, one of those things that hunters really have no reliable way of becoming themselves, but also the thing that Hunter the Reckoning used to be all about: the Imbued. Imbued are what Hunter the Reckoning used to be all about. Regular human beings until, in a moment of sublime clarity, they had an experience of complete true sight. Glancing behind the manufactured reality of the real world and beholding the truth of the supernatural. From that moment on, they become obsessed with hunting the monsters that exist in the night. Not entirely unlike the hunters of the new Hunter, but crucially imbued, and not just regular people to whom something happened, but regular people who were chosen by enigmatic entities known as messengers, which then proceed to communicate with them, sometimes more, sometimes less, somewhat sporadically, in various cryptic ways. The broken English of your spam emails might contain crucial information. The flickering light by the dumpster behind the petrol station spells Morse code. An authoritative voice resonating inside your head speaks a single crucial word of advice or warning. Random bits of conversation you pick up out of context suddenly make sense when you put them all together. As you can imagine, the Imbued are quite insane, like beyond just the fact that they can divine information knowable only to them. Their mind is like more laser focused on the hunt than anyone's. They are in fact supernaturally obsessed with it. And though they are ultimately still mortal, they are imbued with certain supernatural abilities. And which abilities those are really depends on what messenger was in touch with them and what creed they are a part of. At least this is what creeds used to be in the OG Hunter the Reckoning, and now creeds are some different, but they used to be this. Now, it must be said that the messengers are some of the most enigmatic entities in all of World of Darkness. There appear to be 3 of them, and each of those is a master of 3 particular creeds, but some say that there are actually 9 distinct messengers. Others say there's really just one messenger that gives different imbued, different creeds that are socially constructed into larger categories based on some sort of cosmic scheme. Others say that that is true, except the one messenger that exists is actually like 1,000 messengers that exist in sort of a hive mind. They may be angels, they may be Eastern gods, they may be some sort of rogue or not so rogue project of the technocracy or the traditions. They may be whatever the fuck is in the sarcophagi guarded by the Talmei Ra. It's really anyone's guess. Each of the creeds has its own spread of supernatural abilities known as edges. There's also edges now in Hunter, and they mean some different than what they used to, but it's kind of like a similar narrative space. And these are the edges that they have an inborn talent for, but they can, in theory, learn the edges of other Hunter creeds. As I've said before, you can pretty much build most of these powers if you understand how they work in the framework that is given to you in Hunter 5. Some of them you can't, some of them you might prefer to run more like the old-fashioned way, and because the versions of pretty much all World of Darkness games are very cross-compatible, you can homebrew that up from the last edition. The virtue of mercy is embodied by Imbued, who see it as their primary mission to save people from monsters, more so than destroying the monsters themselves. And though, of course, the easiest way of saving people from monsters is to destroy those monsters, merciful Imbued will never be willing to sacrifice innocent lives to achieve this goal. They will, in fact, even as they are hunting their quarry, often try to find ways of redeeming it, whether that be making it turn into an innocuous human form, or if that is impossible, at least give it the opportunity to achieve some sort of metaphysical redemption. The Imbued of the Innocent Creed are pure and noble souls whose existence is all about healing rifts between humans and the supernatural, ensuring that there is peace insofar as that is possible at all. Some of them are outright pacifists, exclusively seeking dialogue and understanding, using their powers to protect mortals and thwart the efforts of monsters without necessarily killing them. With their edges, they can calm down the most tense of situations, make potential victims imperceptible to monsters, divine hidden information, and control light. That's a major theme for them, even in ways that imbues light with additional magical properties that drive away all manner of supernaturals. The Imbued of the Martyr Creed are self-sacrificial warriors who seek redemption for some type of darkness that they feel is within themselves, by taking the bullet, claw, or spell instead of the people they're trying to protect. They will always be the first to jump into the breach when there is danger, and they'll always be happy to sacrifice if it means reducing someone else's suffering. In this, they too are not even necessarily here to kill, but to be killed instead of the people they're trying to save. Their edges are very powerful, but always come with some sort of grave personal cost. They can become formidable warriors that terrify even hardened monsters, understand those monsters at a fundamental level so they can predict their next moves, absorb harm inflicted on others onto themselves, and even strip supernatural beings of their abilities. The Imbued of the Redeemer Creed are on a quest to eradicate supernatural beings by unmaking them entirely, saving those of them that can be saved, which they will go to great lengths to identify. They understand that many monsters are not necessarily monsters by choice, but that it is often a condition imposed upon them with little say. And though many of them cannot be healed necessarily, they can be helped to see the error of their ways, and in many cases, granted a painless death. Their edges revolve mostly around holding up a mirror to monsters, drawing out the hidden humanity within them, often by inducing immense guilt and shame, and understanding their true intentions, not just their monstrous intentions, but the synthesis of the person and the beast. They can also help regulate harm caused by the occasional outburst in a relapse, and even suppress many of their supernatural flaws. The virtue of vision is embodied by Imbued who have an eye for the big picture. That the hunt is a process with goals, and that decisions need to be made in alignment with those goals, instead of getting lost in the day-to-day of killing monsters. In the world of today, which is defined almost entirely by a ceaseless hunt with no end in sight, only one of their creeds is actually particularly common among Imbued. The other two are sort of too monumental and weird to produce viable hunters most of the time. But given that this virtue is about thinking in the long term, who knows what kind of roles they have that might become important one day, or have been important in the past. The Imbued of the Hermit Creed are tuned into the voices of the messengers more than any other. Instead of just the occasional cryptic message, they hear the constant chatter of angel radio in the back of their minds with overwhelming clarity. And that is just too much for most people. Hence why hermits tend to retreat from human civilization and go to some kind of place that limits all kinds of stimuli to the minimum amount possible, to survive the deafening chatter in the comfort of some, soundproof padded room with white walls and like a chair, maybe. Their edges are built around either channeling the voices of the messengers, which tend to contain very useful information, or astrally projecting outside of their places of comfort to communicate with other hunters when they need to. Which is really the only time that other creeds get to interact with the elusive hermits. The Imbued of the Visionary Creed are the leaders, directors, and logisticians of the hunter world, capable of gleaning the consequences of the unpredictable, and knowing which pieces need to come together for the puzzle to fit. They are the compass needle that keeps hunters of all creeds moving forward in the right direction, instead of them just scuttling off in various different places to follow their own particular obsessions, helping them conserve their energies and lean into the wind only when that would actually accomplish something. Their edges give them abilities to divine information about the past, the the present, and the future, allowing them to act accordingly, but also supernaturally regroup and recharge other Imbued in times of need. The Imbued of the Wayward Creed are cursed with a vision of the world entirely without monsters, because at the same time they have that overlaid with a constant sharp sense of where monsters are in the vicinity and where they can find more. Generally avoided by the other creeds for their bloodlust, wayward hunters are very effective solo artists, though having one on your team can be very useful if you really want to kill the quarry no matter the cost. Their edges revolve mostly around detecting monsters and sensing their abilities, as well as inciting a berserker-like bloodlust in other Imbued that override whatever it is that they believe in, even the precepts of their creed. Some of them can also, control the air and read the minds of the dead, which I don't know what that is about, but it is a thing. The virtue of Zeal makes up what some might call the actual, real, true warriors among hunters. Those whose purpose is to explicitly fight monsters with a vast array of tactics and weapons, and never without thought. There are some of them who are quite arrogant about being the only true, actual, real warriors that actually really fight. They're the only ones who are really hunters. That's pretty rare though. Most of them understand that all of the creeds serve an important purpose in the hunt, and the messengers came up with all of those, so there must be a reason why they exist. The Imbued of the Avenger Creed are driven with a desire for vengeance against every monster who has ever harmed a human being, which ultimately does tend to be most of them. They just don't strike as indiscriminately as certain other creeds. They put out the fire where it's burning. Their purpose is to be the sword that drives fear into the hearts of all those monsters who would dare give in to their weaker natures and attack humanity. They eliminate threats, and their edges really make them into a predator that hunts other predators, giving them the ability to track prey while avoiding detection, take a beating, and also do immense damage. The coolest thing probably is that they can conjure spiritual weapons out of thin air. The Imbued of the Defender Creed are the inverse of that, focusing on protecting their team and humanity, be this loved ones or people who just happened to run into the crossfire from the dangers of the supernatural using martial means. They will try to avoid taking unnecessary risks and make sure that other hunters don't take unnecessary risks either, because they understand that one dead hunter today means a lot fewer people saved in the future. On the other hand, collateral damage is fewer people saved right now, so they try to avoid that as well. Their edges are almost entirely defensive, or at least very close range, allowing them to lock down areas against supernatural intrusion, draw the attention of monsters upon themselves, and withstand immense amounts of physical harm. The Imbued of the Judge Creed seek to evaluate monsters based on their actions and their innate character, and ensure that they get what they deserve, which is not always necessarily destruction. Some of them see themselves as the stick to the carrot of the Redeemer Creed, while others simply think of themselves as the only ones among the Imbued who have an objective view on monsters that is not clouded by some sort of compulsions to see monsters in a certain light. Their edges help them in this by allowing them to detect lies and discern truth, which are two different things. Bind supernatural creatures in place, and this is a wild one, they can create sort of contracts with them that if they do a certain thing, they will be immediately magically punished for it. And that punishment need not be that they are destroyed. It often isn't. Now, the Imbued are, if you choose to play them, somewhat morally simple compared to many of the other edges that hunters can have. They are, after all, divine monster hunters appointed by some sort of greater set of beings that, though sometimes a bit radical in their worldview, are not as inherently compromised as many of the other options. Pretty much all the types of supernatural beings that hunters classify as monsters also have the ability to give those hunters gifts that will make them more effective as hunters. And I'm not just talking about the information sharing harem, although that is definitely very useful. The knowledge that the supernatural beings living in the world of darkness have about the supernatural beings living in the world of darkness is generally pretty spotty, but also a hell of a lot better than what most hunters know. When it comes to gathering intelligence, of course, no one is more useful than ghosts. Wraiths know things, and they can find out things in ways that no other supernatural being can, all without ever being seen. And all they want is to feel alive again, so I mean, what's the problem with giving them a ride every once in a while? Certainly they wouldn't have some sort of ulterior motive agenda that they might pursue in the world of the living during the few hours that they have of feeling alive. It's not like there is a complex bureaucratic government in wherever the fuck it is ghosts live. There is though, and I posted the video here earlier in the sidebar about Wraith the Oblivion. Check it out. But you know what'll make you into like a real beast of a hunter? Becoming a vampire's ghoul. Seriously, ghouls may not be vampires, but they are certainly a good cut above humans in terms of their abilities and physicality. They can learn weaker versions of the various disciplines that their domitors have access to. So in addition to just being more physically formidable thanks to the vitae coursing through your veins, you might also have access to some of that potent super strength or that celerity super speed. The incredible senses of Auspex or a hunter that knows how to obfuscate? How useful would that be to just be undetectable? Not to mention you stop aging and you heal faster too. I mean, of course you will also become devoted to the vampire whose blood you imbibed, and if you want to keep your powers and your age, you're gonna have to be imbibing a whole lot more of it, but you're getting it from someone who's trustworthy, right? You're getting it from someone who you like, someone you feel more and more loyal to each day. And it's really, now that you're thinking about it, after all this time, it's really rather strange that you were reluctant to enter this agreement in the first place. It's so clearly mutually beneficial. You are so much better a hunter for it, and sometimes the vampire even feeds you intel. And so you don't hunt them. You maybe hunt people that they see as their enemies, because, I mean, they're clearly the better person from among the vampires. Those other people are more dangerous. And if other hunters were to try to hunt that vampire, you might try to discourage them, because it would be a stupid idea to turn an ally of the hunt into a quarry. And hey, look, if they become too insistent, you might need to protect your ally, an ally to the hunt, from those misguided hunters. And before you know it, you are that vampire's personal warhound, a highly trained killer, loyal to them and only to them. Vampires are deceptive creatures by nature. They take the long view of things, so a decade or two to turn a hunter into a dedicated ghoul is really just gonna produce a weapon that is all the more honed for it. A good ghoul is worth the investment. Of course, most hunters are reluctant to do things like that. They know it's a dangerous path. There are a lot of less dangerous options as well. You may have been born Kinane, a human with some degree of fairy blood running through your veins. And Kinane or no, changelings and beings deeper in the hierarchy of fairy might have all manner of blessings and boons to bestow upon you. And some will certainly do this out of the kindness of their hearts. Many love humanity. And every once in a while you might have to refresh them on their steady supply of Garmonbosia, but you barely know what the fuck that even is. So what's the harm in it? They might even take it from you. And if you're lucky, that'll come as a bout of great inspiration. Might even drive you to hunt someone in particular. Maybe someone they don't like. Werewolves have kinfolk, which you also would need to be born as, and many of them also are capable of enchanting you in ways that'll make you more powerful. In general, though, it's probably better to, just stay away from werewolves, really. They don't even hunt them. They're fucking dangerous, and you should be scared of them. Also, being kinfolk comes with all manner of, responsibilities that you don't want. It's a whole thing. It's much more convenient if your character is just someone who naturally has psychic powers, which are actually surprisingly common. They're just, psychic powers that are based just in the fact that they are psychic powers. That's a supernatural source that they come from. It's just that in those people who have them, they're usually very weak and underdeveloped because, what are you gonna do? Go to fucking telekinesis school? But certain humans have such innate talents that can read from like thought reading to becoming invisible. There's people who can do remote viewing, there's people who can talk to ghosts just as easily as they can talk to the living. There are some who can drain other people's energy. Boy oh boy, don't we know some of those? Some can like interface mentally with electronic devices. Even teleportation is in the cards. And of course, there is mages, or rather the knowledge that mages have. Being reality benders, mages are as varied as they come. And while many of them will be happy to help you directly, something that's even more valuable, because it doesn't bind you to them as much, is learning the sorcerer's secrets of their various magical paradigms. I've explained sorcery before, and you should also check out my whole video on Mage the Ascension, but basically what it boils down to is that sorcery is a limited form of magic that anyone can learn that has a lot fewer potential applications for its power, but also comes with the benefit that it doesn't generate paradox. I've used the analogy of learning to play one song on the piano instead of learning to play the piano. It's magic for the unawakened, and it has like hundreds of thousands, probably even different traditions of it that have been like ingrained through continued practice by various mages into reality. And many of the sorcerous arts actually are quite powerful. Basically every form of like arcane or folkloric witchcraft, from like putting down tarot cards, voodoo healing, sometimes like prayer to manifest things, everything that you can think of is there if you can unlock its secrets. And mages are usually the ones who have those secrets. And much like certain types of magic, sorcery can be about technology as well. The Orpheus Group, with like their ghost caskets that allow you to be sort of dead and astrally project, that is technically sorcery. Or rather, to like put it in technocratic terms, they are extraordinary citizens in a qualified sense. Speaking of the technocracy, what about the technocracy? Yeah. Seriously, what about it though? Yes, hunters are mortal humans confronted with the supernatural, interacting with the supernatural, all that stuff. Which the technocracy obviously doesn't like, because the technocracy doesn't want humans to be aware of the supernatural. It's against the consensus that they're trying to build. They also see it as their job to protect regular humans from the supernatural, and hunters being regular humans, you'd think that the technocracy would do everything in its power to make sure that they don't do their thing. If you don't know exactly what I'm talking about, that's okay. I'll try to express it as clearly as I can, but I also have a 2-hour video on the technocracy because it's a big subject matter in the world of darkness. So first of all, the technocracy is not all-powerful. It engages in a lot of risk management. That's really most of what it does. Yes, it is their job to eliminate monsters that threaten humanity. By definition, through the anthropic principle of narrative play, the monsters that hunters are hunting are the ones that slipped the net of the technocracy. And, you know, let's be serious, the net is pretty wide meshed because the material it is made out of is very expensive. The technocracy is using that net to fight Cthulhu. That is what they had, that's their top priority. So in a sense, for the purposes of terranorming, it is less than ideal that there are normal human people who are aware of the supernatural and engage with it all the time, strengthening those particular beliefs. They also slipped the net, but it's a different net from a different direction, much like all of the humans that come into contact with all manner of supernatural creatures and are drawn into their societies. And, I mean, you know, better it be than a hunter than a ghoul. The technocracy knows that there are certain types of beings, such as vampires and werewolves, fairies, ghosts, that kind of thing, whose existence they simply cannot prevent because it is anchored in external reality. They have been able to delete quite a few different types of beings from existence very effectively, but these ones they can't, and they know that. So as long as those things that they cannot delete from existence remain in existence and do things, as a consequence of that, more hunters are going to become aware of them and start hunting. So the technocracy does the same with hunters as it does with all of those supernaturals. They manage them. And though the top-level idealists in management, ironic, may not like it, it's actually kind of useful to have self-funded groups of sort of specialist-y type people who will hunt down monsters that become too loud and threaten consensus. There are a few amalgams in the NWO whose job it is to make sure that hunters are utilized as a terranorming tool, basically, to shape consensus in the interests of the technocracy. And yes, that does include making sure that no one believes hunters when they start talking about monsters. That is, after all, the technocracy's highest goal. But it also probably involves actively supporting them with intel every once in a while. Of course, they'll never know it was the New World Order who tipped them off to that weird fairy creature hunting people in the Everglades. But the information will get to them through one of the many glowy org fronts that they have, and then the problem will be resolved without the technocracy having to utilize much in the way of resources. Of course, the technocracy will get massively indignant and pissy if any hunters ever manage to stumble into a technocracy op. But if push comes to shove, they can always wipe those hunters' memories. They have the fucking device from Men in Black. They can do that. Not to mention, keeping an eye on Hunter Society does very much make for an excellent recruiting ground. Because maybe someone in there, or even a whole group of people, is so good at doing their thing that you reckon maybe if you gave them some bigger guns, you could turn them into extraordinary citizens and utilize them against Cthulhu. So Hunter is really about all of the marginal spaces in World of Darkness, where the various different supernatural societies intersect. And aside from maybe Mage, it is probably the best system, the best game, if you want to experience as many facets of World of Darkness in a single chronicle as possible. It's good if you want to feel like you're the good guys for once, even though, in practice that's probably not going to be that simple. And it's great if you really like the supernatural, in this case, the TV show Roadhouse vibe. Because especially Hunter 5, that's exactly what that is. Anyway, that is Hunter, which I know is much anticipated, much requested video. Unfortunately, I may not have given you all the answers you were looking for, specifically a certain show that is very popular on YouTube. A lot of people had very specific questions about that. I don't know what the fuck the blue guy in the blender shop is either. And because it's Hunter, I mean, definitely the creators of that show, they know they got it all figured out. It's not like they don't need to know either. It's not like their main purpose isn't to create an interesting story that has intriguing mystery elements. But it is, though. It's just that Hunter Society is always very particular to the place that you're playing in. So explore the real world for real inspiration. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, this one was ironically the most potpourri of them all, even more than Mage, precisely because I had to cover not so much ground, but so many different types of ground in so many different books and shit. And see you around, cunts.